And thank you so much for joining us for this Tuesday's edition of Alaska Weather. I'm David Percy, a meteorologist with the National Weather Service, hosting today's show. And up first on Hazardous Weather Graphic, Eastern Arctic Coast blizzard warning out, until noon Wednesday, through tonight, noon Wednesday there, for winds gusting 45 miles an hour and blowing snow, creating whiteout conditions, or at least visibility is less than a quarter mile at times. Up there in the shaded area, Kaktovik, Barter Island, and then winter weather advisories for the western Arctic coast out for tonight and tomorrow for snow and blowing snow visibilities to a quarter mile or less. And down to the south, we've got winter weather advisories. That's for the system coming in late tonight and tomorrow, be spreading snow and maybe even mixed precipitation. For example, freezing rain or sleet, along with the snow. That'll be out along the coastline and more to the south. But that's moving into the southwest interior, and by tomorrow afternoon should spread into at least the Tanana area. And moving on to the next graphic, farther to the south, winter storm warning for heavy snow for the southern panhandle there in the red shaded areas, and winter weather advisories for snow in the yellow areas down there for the southeast coast. And that's for the 4 to 8 inches. That's out until 7 p.m. this evening. It's only a few hours more, so probably the heaviest precipitation already starting to taper off there. But anywhere from 3 to 8 inches falling across southern panhandle, areas from Ketchikan to Klawock, much less so at Heidelberg, much less precip there. And then drying out over the northern areas. And from there, going to winter solstice occurred at about 7 a.m. this morning, marking the first day of astronomical winter. Almost seems like winter started in September, the way the foliage froze onto the trees. But first astronomical day occurred today, so first full day of winter will be tomorrow the 22nd, and then the days slowly start increasing in length. From there, satellite pictures showing the next big mass of moisture with pretty good storm. Doesn't really show up so much as the vivid curvature and the cloudiness that some storms do, but a lot of moisture coming northward, mostly just a big push of warm air with the warm front already spreading cirrus into the northern Bering Sea and the Bering Strait and into the southwest coast, and bringing warm temperatures with it in the warm sector south of the warm front, clearing out Unalaska. Temperatures rising in the mid-50s, about 55 degrees at Unalaska this afternoon with some sun breaks there. Front brought about 1.5 inches of rain to AKwx with gusts of 53 miles an hour. But to the east, moisture, low pressure dropping southeastward there, bringing the snow to the panhandle, but drying out from northwest to southeast. And that'll continue. Still cloudy up in the northern areas. Clearing out southern Alaska, areas of dense fog like northern Cook Inlet, Anchorage, into the Matanuska Valley. Dense fog advisory out till 11 p.m. tonight. And then snow blowing snow Arctic coast, still getting clipped with occasional troughs dropping down from the Arctic there and keeping those winds on the gusty side. Cape Lisburne, gusts 60 miles an hour today. And even Fort Yukon seeing gusts of 32 miles an hour. So breezy over areas even of the northeast interior. And you can see the another mass of moisture coming down toward the western Arctic coast. On the chart, that's signified by a trough there approaching the western coast again, kicking up the winds and snow. And that'll extend all along the coastline tonight, with the worst conditions ending up in the eastern Arctic coast. High pressure, colder, clear temperature, drier, colder, and less wind over the southern half of the state, but a little breezy along the North Gulf Coast and pretty windy Lynn Canal Glacier Bay area. And snow continues slowly tapering off over the southern panhandle. And for tonight, going to the tonight frame, you can see the warm front moves on to the southwest coast, so snow changing to rain, and rain back to the Alaska Peninsula, periods of. And rain will move into the eastern Aleutians, and then that'll change to showers over Atka, ending for Adak, clearing out a little bit. And then the next round of snow showers with cold air coming around that 965 millibar low hanging back over the northwest and western Bering Sea. For tomorrow, we've got snow, blowing snow, Seward Peninsula lifting north of St. Lawrence Island. Some snow, clouds increasing. May get snow into the Kenai Peninsula late in the afternoon. Kind of timing a little difficult, but that could happen. And clear and cold over the Panhandle. Less snow and blowing snow for the eastern Arctic coast. Outlook for Thursday, snow, blowing and drifting along the Arctic coast, especially on the east side. And that system off the coast tomorrow, the low pressure area there near Norton Sound, that just all kind of fades away and leaves the moisture behind in across southern Alaska tonight. And moving on, lows tonight, maybe 20 below for the Copper River Basin, 20 above. Sleep mute, say mid to upper 20s for Bristol Bay near 30, Kodiak Island. Single numbers, south central Alaska, northern Panhandle, lower 20s to the south. Highs tomorrow below zero, Copper River Basin, but mid to upper 30s for Bristol Bay, mid 30s Kodiak Island, 20s to mid 30s for the Panhandle, 8 to 15 south central Alaska. And then Thursday afternoon highs near zero for the Copper River Basin. Homer up into the upper 30s, near 40 for Kodiak, and lower to mid 30s for Bristol Bay. Cold 20s for the Panhandle. And for the Arctic coast, highs well below zero, or lows well below zero, even into the Tanana Valley. And St. Lawrence Island, though, staying above zero. Highs near zero in the central interior, a little below zero for the northern valleys out to the Arctic coast. And then 30 to 35 below in the northeast interior.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
First line weather graphic, big slug of IFR coming into the southwest interior, extending up to St. Lawrence Island and westward, just east of Atka, VFR spreading into Adak and VFR back to Shimianatu. Some marginal VFR north of the Alaska Range up across the central upper Tanana Valley to north of Eagle, and Brooks Range out to the Arctic coast, marginal VFR. VFR, southeast Alaska, south central areas to start, and the Panhandle for the entire day. So we'll see for Wednesday afternoon. VFR holds up over the southeast coast and Copper River Basin, Prince William Sound. Marginal VFR spreading into western Prince William Sound late. IFR spreading into central Cook Inlet during the midday and afternoon hours to the Kenai Peninsula. Kodiak Island, southwest part, IFR, and then that zone of IFR, Alaska Peninsula, Bristol Bay, up into the Kuskokwim Valley, western Alaska Range, all the way up to the Seward Peninsula, Bering Strait, St. Lawrence Island, followed by some widespread VFR over the central Aleutians, spreading to Unalaska Island and north of the Pribilofs, all VFR tomorrow afternoon. Marginal VFR, eastern North Slope in the Arctic coast, otherwise VFR up that way. And for Thursday morning, IFR shows up eastern North Slope and eastern Arctic coast with VFR along and just south of the Brooks Range, Yukon Flats, Noatak Valley, northwest coast. And then a band of IFR, St. Lawrence Island and across Yukon Delta, and across the southern part of the state, central, south central interior areas, with marginal VFR down to northern Cook Inlet, breaking out VFR, Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, some marginal stuff for Shelikof Strait. More IFR, Adak Atka to Nikolsky, marginal VFR in Alaska Dutch Harbor, VFR for, say, Cold Bay, King Cove area. And the Pribilofs, St. Paul, St. George, VFR, IFR, eastern North Gulf Coast, marginal VFR, northern Panhandle, and along the coastline, staying VFR off to the east. And for the afternoon, some marginal VFR on the south coast of the Panhandle, otherwise VFR over the inside waters, Gulf of Alaska, North Gulf Coast, Prince William Sound, Cook Inlet, Manusquesit Valley, most of the Copper River Basin up to the Alaska Range VFR. Along the Alaska Range and north, marginal VFR with some areas of IFR, especially Kuskokwim Valley and the lower Yukon River Valley there out to the deltas, all IFR for the afternoon Thursday. Massive IFR spreading into the Bering Sea, covering all of the Aleutians up to the Alaska Peninsula, and some IFR, eastern Arctic coast and North Slope. Anatuvik, marginal VFR trending to, well, improving to VFR, same trend, starting out lowest conditions in the morning early on for Adigan, becoming VFR. And for Lake Clark and Merrill, other way around, VFR becoming IFR, just a downward trend in conditions, especially in the afternoon, could be quite rapid, especially on the western entrances going IFR. And rainy not so fast, maybe marginal VFR to VFR. Actually, that should be the other way around, VFR to marginal VFR. And for windy VFR, Isabel, VFR, and Mentesta, VFR under cold high pressure, and Tanita, VFR. But the west side there, turning toward marginal VFR late in the day for Tanita, and Portage, VFR, becoming marginal VFR. I think the IFR will hold off until Wednesday evening. Chilkoot and White, VFR. Freezing levels, big push of warm air into the southeast Bering Sea. You can see 12,000 feet just catching the Alaska Peninsula, 10,000 feet up to the Pribilofs, 2,000 feet nearly to St. Lawrence Island. And the icing, with the warm air, push of moisture, areas of considerable moderate, especially Norton Sound and the southern Seward Peninsula down to maybe the Yukon River there, and the western Alaska Range. And then another smaller, less significant batch pushing into the southwest Bering and western Aleutian areas. Now the jet stream, west-southwest flow, 115 to 150 knots from the eastern Bering Sea into the interior, taking a northerly turn across the Panhandle north, 165 knots, clipping the eastern and southern southeast coast, 9,000 feet. Westerly flow right across the Bering, 60 to 85 knots. Turns northwest into the Gulf of Alaska, missing the Panhandle, and at 3,000 feet, again, the westerlies over the top of the ridge near the Fox Islands, 55 knot northwesterlies across the Aleutian Range, 65 knots blowing in toward Norton Sound. Look for moderate chop. Kotzebue Sound, southward western interior, Bristol Bay, Kodiak Island, and the western Aleutians.
I can't really name anyone that has so much integrity as she does to the things that she's accomplishing. It's pretty amazing. Having Claire as a role model, just a strong woman in science and just so smart and so kind. It's just a huge confidence booster is that, hey, I could do that too, you know? That's possible, that's successful, that's what I want to do.
I would characterize her as a pioneer in the field.
The amount and quality of the work she's put out is second to none.
I know people who have a lot of tenacity. I know people that have integrity, but it's rare that people have both together in that, you know, that combination that Claire does.
Every morning, Dr. Claire Parkinson gets up before sunrise and runs 2 miles to work. She hasn't missed a day in nearly 40 years. To know the evolution of sea ice and how we observe it from space is to know Claire. This year, she's celebrating 40 years at NASA.
When I arrived at Goddard, which was in July of 1978, it was an incredibly exciting period here. Satellites were pretty new, but a lot of data had been collected.
NASA scientists were inundated with information, and Claire was in a cohort looking at sea ice, trying to make sense of a jumble of very raw, very new data. It was around that time that Claire and her team, at the time led by Dr. Jay Zwally, created the principal sea ice record that we use today.
How does something like that record help you do your job?
Oh, that record is fundamental to understanding sea ice. So without it, we wouldn't know how rapidly it's changing.
You may not realize it, but Claire's work studying the changing extent of the ice caps deeply affected our understanding of climate change, and relatedly, our understanding of how climate change affects life on Earth.
One of the clearest signals for climate change that resonates with people has been this shrinking of the polar ice cap in the summer that we're able to see because of Claire's work.
After we had a record that was about 15, 20 years long, we started noticing that the extent of the ice in the Arctic was getting smaller over time.
Sea ice is formed on the surface of the ocean and therefore is made from seawater. The biggest concentration is in the Arctic, and it's also where the biggest loss in sea ice is occurring. Every year, NASA reports on the sea ice minimum and maximum extents. As expected, the data is concerning.
By now, not only has this trend toward lesser ice continued, but it's even accelerated, so that now the decreases are greater than what they had been.
These trends are deeply troubling, but one thing's for sure. Our awareness of shrinking sea ice extent due to climate change was propelled faster and further after Claire Parkinson arrived at NASA.
I mean, she takes her job seriously, and the health and welfare of those instruments in space, yeah, she's on it. You know, it's one of the things you don't worry about because Claire's in the loop on these things. It's going to be fine.
In science, we stand on the shoulders of giants, on the shoulders of those who explored before us. But then, some among us are giants.
For a scientist, it's incredibly exciting to be studying these glaciers and ice sheets right now because they're doing something that hasn't happened in thousands of years. We're watching changes take place that haven't happened since the end of the last ice age. Tuesday was cold, I almost froze my toes. Oh, what's it gonna be next week? Who knows? That's climate. Oh, that's the climate you got. You take a bunch of weather and you average it together and you're doing the climate rock.
At a glacial pace, it means something's happening so slowly you can barely tell it's happening at all. That used to describe the very incremental movement glaciers and ice sheets experienced each year. But now that's changing. We're tagging along with 3 NASA scientists to understand the different lengths they go to not only investigate ice sheets and glaciers, but also communicate their often complicated science to the public. First, let's get oriented. Ice sheets, in pink, pretty much occur in only 2 places, Antarctica and Greenland. Glaciers, in yellow, play a key role draining melt off the ice sheet. Glaciers are also found in the high mountains, but we'll get to those in another episode.
So we know that something's happening in Greenland right now that's unprecedented in the last several thousand years.
That's Dr. Josh Willis, oceanographer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Josh and his team are tackling one of the major environmental challenges of the 21st century, trying to answer fundamental questions about how melting glaciers impact sea level rise.
With my mission, Oceans Melting Greenland, or OMG for short, we're trying to understand just how much of Greenland's melt is caused by the oceans.
Along with being one of NASA's top scientists working on the cryosphere, Josh is passionate about demystifying climate change in typically unconventional ways.
I think by reaching out to people with a little bit of humor, a little bit of fun, maybe a song, you really have the opportunity to help people understand and come to terms with what we're doing to our planet. Because it's definitely happening and it's definitely a big deal, and we need to start preparing for it.
Down at the opposite pole, Dr. Kelly Brunt is getting ready for a major expedition.
In December and January this coming year, I'll actually be in Antarctica down near the South Pole collecting ground-based GPS data.
This is actually Kelly's second expedition to the South Pole. The first occurred in December and January of last year. Both surveys are critical and will help validate data collected by NASA's airborne campaign, Operation Icebridge, and the recently launched satellite mission ISAT-2.
All three of these layers, that ground-based, that airborne, and the satellite, are all tied together. The ground-based helps validate both the satellite and the the airborne helps give us more validation data for the satellites, but also a bigger story with respect to the depth of the ice sheet and what's going on underneath the surface.
While some scientists are taking measurements in the field, others are looking for answers in physics and lines of code.
For me, those projections that we are doing, they do have a very personal meaning.
Dr. Sophie Nowicki is an ice sheet modeler. That means she and her team have the important job of forecasting how ice will change in the future, which also predicts changes in sea level rise. It's a job she doesn't take lightly, especially since urban planning and infrastructure use her team's models to make decisions about the future and safety of their communities.
When we make those projections that are 100 years in the future, 100 years can seem so far away, like I don't have to worry about it, it's just too far. But actually they are not. It's really like the future that we are looking at that our children or grandchildren will see to experience.
Whether it's learning to communicate in new ways, traversing a swath of Antarctica in a massive piston bully, or taking responsibility for an impactful climate forecast, our NASA explorers are pushing the limits of discovery every day. But on a very human level, they're people with families and friends who have a stake in finding out why and how the planet is changing as rapidly as it is.
Every place, at least so far, that we have found life, we found water along with it. And so when we try to understand the thresholds for life, where life might exist elsewhere in our solar system and the universe, water is one of those things that we look for.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back. Looking at coastal water forecasts, there are 30-knot winds out of the north and northeast for the outer coastline of the Panhandle. We've got gale warnings for Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, Northern Inner Channel, as well as Stevens Passage. For sustained northerly winds, 35 knots, sea 6 to 7 feet. Clarence Strait, lighter winds out of the northwest at about 20 knots. And moving on to Thursday, we'll see on Thursday, get the cursor on the right screen, north winds 30 knots, Lynn Canal, Glacier Bay, also small craft advisory, Stevens Passage, north at 25, north at 20 for Clarence Strait. North to northeast, small craft advisory level winds for the south coast at 30 knots, seas about 12 feet. And lighter northeast winds 15 to 20 knots on the north coast, but seas still around 12 feet. And for the Wednesday, let me go back the right direction here. Okay, for Thursday, south central Alaska, we've got northwest winds at 30 knots for Prince William Sound. North Gulf Coast, northwest winds 40 to 45 knots. Gale warnings also for the Barren Islands, northwest winds 45 knots. West winds 45 knots for Kamishak Bay. Southern Cook Inlet, west winds 40 knots. 25 knot west winds for Northern Cook Inlet. And moving on to Wednesday for Kodiak Island. Shelikof Strait, gale warning southwest at 35 knots, seas 10 feet, 30 knot westerly winds east side of Kodiak Island all the way down to Castle Cape. And the Alaska Peninsula, southwest 30 knots, seas 10 to 12 feet. Bristol Bay, southwest winds 30 knots with 8-foot seas. And for Thursday, Kodiak Island, westerlies 30 to 35 knots and 30 knot winds Sitkinak to Castle Cape. And Bristol Bay, winds west 25 knots, seas 6 feet. And south to southwest winds 20 knots for the Alaska Peninsula. For Alaska Island, small craft advisory, southwest winds 30 knots, west-southwest 30 knots for Unmak Island. Adak and Atka, lighter winds, west 20 to 25 knots. Gales move into Amchitka Island during the day tomorrow, and even stronger winds, Kiska to Shimia, south 45 knots, seas building to 20 feet out that way. Then those come down to southeast at 30 knots from Shimia to Kiska on Thursday. And gale force southeast winds at 35 for Amchitka Island. Gale warnings for the central Aleutians. South to southeast 30-35 knots. Small craft advisories for the Fox Islands. South to southeast winds 20 to 30 knots. Southwest coast, gale warnings for the Yukon Delta coast, southwest 35 knots, otherwise small craft advisories. South of Nunivak Island, where winds will be southwest at 30 knots and extend out to the Pribilof Islands. Gale warnings for St. Matthew Island, south winds 30 knots, seas building to 20 feet. Gale warnings for St. Lawrence Island, east winds 45 knots. And for Thursday, St. Lawrence Island, north winds 25 knots. Yukon Delta coast, northeast at 30. Kuskokwim Delta coast there, southwest at 25. South 25 for the Pribilofs, and southeast 30 for St. Matthew Island. Up along the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, gale warnings hold through tomorrow for the area from Kaktovik and Barter Island to Demarcation Point into Mackenzie Bay. West winds 35 knots there and 30 knots for the eastern Arctic coast. Central coast, still brisk wind advisories, about 25 knots. And then under brisk wind advisory threshold on the west side there, west at 20. 15-knot northerlies from Cape Beaufort to Cape Thompson, northeast 25, Cape Thompson to Wales. And for Thursday, northwest at 20 knots there, Wales to Cape Thompson. And 15-knot winds from Cape Thompson all the way up to the central coast from the west or west-northwest. Even lighter winds on the eastern Beaufort Sea coast, but still brisk wind advisories there over toward Demarcation Point. West winds 20 to 25 knots. And for tonight's blizzard warning continues tonight for the eastern Beaufort Sea coast for 45-mile-an-hour winds and whiteout conditions and blowing snow there, but it improves back to the west. You can see high pressure, less wind. Drying out over the interior ahead of the next rapidly moving system, bringing another round of warm air and moisture into the southwest coast up to St. Lawrence Island. Rain and wind, Pribilofs to the eastern Aleutians. Not too bad for the Alaska Peninsula. And colder and drier over the Panhandle. That continues in tomorrow for the southeast coast. Mostly clear skies and cold temperatures. Snow blowing snow, Seward Peninsula, improving for St. Lawrence Island right near the frontal boundary. And moving ahead to Thursday, areas of snow over the southern part of the state and along the Arctic coast there are still getting clipped by Arctic troughs moving from west-northwest to east-southeast. Clear and cold over the Panhandle. Risk of a snow shower down toward Heidelberg, maybe Annette Island, Metlakatla.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.